Welcome to episode 297 of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. I am your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week we'll be talking about Bungie layoffs, Game Informer shuts down, and Dragon Age is getting a release date, and much more. Before we get started, subscribe to the Baunfire Gaming Podcast on your favorite podcast app and leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, or subscribe to the Bon Diesel YouTube channel to get all of my videos, including this podcast. Thank you to everyone who supports as YouTube members and Twitch subscribers. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and all of my other content, you can do either of those things or check out the link in the show description for all of my other content and other ways to support. You can also support my show and other content by sharing new episodes on any social media platform or just with a friend. I do post all my new episodes on Threads, Instagram, and over on Twitter if you want to share in those places. Let's get into the gaming news. We're going to kick it off with Xbox. We got some of the results of their quarter for fiscal year 2024 report, and it shows that their overall revenue is up 61% over the last year, only 3% up without ABK, which is still not bad. It's still up. This has been an interesting, every time this comes up and every time it gets talked about, I think it's kind of interesting how it gets talked about as if that revenue with ABK isn't like real revenue or whatever because it's new, right? And like, no, that's why they bought ABK is for that huge amount of profit that publisher was making off of all of their products, but especially Call of Duty and so on. So but them still being up 3% is okay. It's obviously, I'm sure they'd love to be up more without the ABK numbers. And then another number here was that the hardware revenue was down 42%, and one of their own financial folks said that they expect that to get worse as the quarters go on. Obviously, you can't really spin that in a good way. It's not good that their hardware sales are dropping that badly. But you're also talking about a company that is very not subtly saying like, hey, you don't even need a console to play our stuff, to have Game Pass even. They have a whole marketing campaign going on about you don't need the Xbox. Here, you can get cloud on your TV or your phone or your PC or whatever. As well as a big part of their business is pushing towards things like PC Game Pass, and things like that, which don't require hardware sales, at least not directly from them. So it's not good for their revenue to drop that much in that particular sector. It's also not that surprising. We're also heading into the second half of this generation, and maybe even like late in this generation, if rumors about a new console in 2026 are true. That means that this console, Xbox's series consoles, are in like the last like third of their lifespan. So a big sales drop isn't that surprising for all those reasons put together. Not to mention the other platforms are also seeing some of this for different reasons. We'll talk about Nintendo here in a moment. Satya Nadella, the Microsoft CEO, says the gaming division surpassed 500 million active users across all platforms and devices. This is one of those things that, I'm sure that's not a bad metric. I'm sure they're happy about that. I have no idea what the F that means. It is thought that just Xbox has a much higher number of people interacting with their platform than people may realize for lots of reasons, be it legacy consoles, be it PC, be it more console sales than people think. But this 500 million number must come from something pretty wacky. Like, this must include like phones somehow and things like that. The CEO of Microsoft was speaking positively about Xbox in a pretty notable circumstance. If you're an Xbox fan or you want Xbox to survive, having the head of the company who makes it, despite some of their trials and tribulations over the last couple of years, having him speak good about them is hopefully a good thing, especially in the climate we're currently in. We did also find out that Playground Games has opened up a third studio in Leamington Spa. I'm sure I said that wrong, but when you have a town named that, I don't think it deserves to be said right. Is the whole town a spa? Come on. Their other two studios are working on Forza and Fable. So this is kind of interesting because it suggests, if they're opening a whole studio, that there's a third project that they're going to get started on. This could be support for their other projects, but I kind of doubt it. I feel like they would just expand those teams instead. So them going for a entirely new studio is cool. It means that hopefully there's even more Xbox first-party game publishing games coming. So we'll have to wait and see what comes of that. Bethesda trademarked the word Starborn, and a lot of the speculation is that they will be potentially making a DLC that would be called Starborn. If you aren't familiar with the game and its story, without spoilers, Starborn are let's call them a faction in the game. And if a DLC would focus on their potential origins, that would be super, super cool because it would alleviate or it would address a thing I think a lot of people wanted from Starfield and didn't get. I'm being a bit cryptic because even though we're coming up on a year after the game has come out, I still don't want to spoil things, at least not yet. So, long story short, this being a potential DLC seems likely or possible. It also may be that if they plan on making more of these games in the future, which I don't even want to think about, how far away a Starfield sequel would be when we are looking at Elder Scrolls being years away, Fallout 5 being years and years away, and then presumably we would be looking at Starfield 2. I don't even want to think about like how old I would potentially be when that would happen. But if they intend on doing that, which I believe they do, that's what I've gathered from things they've said. That's a pretty pivotal part of that franchise, that the Starborn faction or class or whatever you want to call it. So maybe they're just locking that up for the future. I don't know. We'll have to wait and find out. Xbox did announce that at Gamescom here in a couple of weeks, they will be showing off 50 plus titles. They have already committed to showing gameplay from the Indiana Jones game, from Shattered Spaces, the first Starfield DLC, as well as some others. It's unlikely they're going to break big news at Gamescom. That's not really what Gamescom is. Gamescom is like the preeminent, here is, this thing is for the fans. Here's more of all the things that you've already heard of or seen. Maybe they'll break news here. I think the fact that I believe Sony is not going to be involved in Gamescom, and who knows how involved Nintendo will be. Not likely very much because they're kind of battening down the hatches until their next hardware release, it seems. So it could be Xbox's show to kind of be the main talking point. So hopefully they can make those talking points a good thing and not bad, like things have been kind of going in general in the gaming industry lately. Microsoft and Activision have started a new team under Blizzard to focus on AA, smaller titles based on their owned IP. I believe things like Out, whatever. A bunch of their existing IPs were mentioned here. So I believe the inspiration was games like Vampire Survivor and stuff, that they want to be able to have kind of a small, agile team that can make games like relatively quickly, at least in the AAA space, at like a AA level, and try to kind of hit some of this indie love that has been so successful recently. Because you can have a game, I'm sure Vampire Survivors has made more, but it's profits are one thing, but profit margin is another. And if you can develop a game for $500,000 and it sells $10 million in sales, that's a drop in the bucket for a company like Microsoft at the end of the day. But for that team, it's extremely sustainable. And if you can have repeated successes like that, that can be a big deal for any studio, even if it's under a hilariously gigantic publisher and overall ownership company. So I assume that's what they're going for. We'll have to see how it plays out. Jez Gordon says that Microsoft and Capcom are trying to alleviate the MT framework issues that are keeping some old games off the Series S and X. So if you've seen any of the releases or announcements recently from Capcom of some of their old fighting games and stuff like that, you'll notice that curiously, these games are being announced for PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, as well as some older hardware, but not for Series X or S, which is the big story. A lesser story is that it's also not there. These games also are not getting PlayStation 5 native copies. In a weird way, and I'm not going to pretend like I know everything about how this works, but this MT framework issue essentially seems to be a problem where it's old tech that the Xbox Series S and X and PS5 are not compatible with. And so the games that get released with this can't be played on those systems, except that somehow PlayStation's abysmal backwards compatibility and cross-gen system, it actually works because you can just download the PlayStation 4 version, which does still work, and then play it on the PS5. But for whatever reason, beyond my understanding, the Xbox One version, which I assume they're either not making one or they are, and it isn't compatible for some reason. Long story short, the overall thing that I've gathered is that it's kind of Capcom just being cheap and kind of lazy from a development point of view to not update this to make it not an issue. So it seems like Microsoft is seeing and probably hearing all of the bad press that they're getting because of this, even though it probably isn't really their fault, and trying to alleviate the issue. At the end of the day, they may be doing it just because of the optics and how bad it's been. And it's been kind of supporting this, in my opinion, erroneous kind of narrative that's saying like, oh, these companies don't want to put their games on Xbox because there's not a big enough community. And it's like, knowing that there's 30 plus million Xbox Series consoles sold, probably I think about over half of them being Series S's. These games are perfect for those systems, and that is a huge install base to sell games to. Even if it's not as big as some of their competitors. So that argument kind of falls apart if you think for 10 seconds. So these issues with the MT framework and all of that make a lot more sense. This also would open up these games to being Game Pass entries, which, especially if this happens after they get this initial launch on the other consoles, I could see that happening. It's perfect for these old games. The last bit is that Avowed has been delayed from February to February 18th of 2025, and the issue mostly has been blamed on crowding. They have a lot of games coming out this fall and winter, and they kind of wanted to get out of the way. As people have kind of thought about in my Discord as well, it seems like they may also be slightly trying to avoid Dragon Age, the Veilguard, which is now expected to come out in October or November. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But this doesn't seem like that big of a deal. Tom Warren, who I have found to be relatively critical and a bit doomery of Xbox, even he came out and said, like, sounds like the game's in great shape. They're really happy with it. This really is legitimately just them trying to get out of the way of some other stuff. One of the big ones being potentially Stalker 2. They're trying to get out of its way after it was delayed to November. A lot of speculation has thought that Avowed was going to come out, or it was going to be in that window, and now it won't be. So early 2025, February does tend to be a pretty packed time of the year for games. Games that get announced late in the previous year So we'll have to see how that plays out, and if they may or may not regret going to that date. Going over the PlayStation, we have more nightmare news from the game industry in general. Bungie is laying off 17% of their workforce, around 220 people. Another almost 200 are being moved either to Sony Entertainment or to a new spin-off studio, which they haven't really fully explained. Since that happened, we've been getting kind of like a trickle of news. I suspect that will continue in the long run. But we found out that the next Destiny game, which was based in the universe but wasn't necessarily Destiny 3, has been shelved. There's no further big updates or DLC for Destiny 2 planned. That this last one was the last one. It'll continue to be supported, but not in a way where they're going to be adding big new bits of content. And Mark Norsworthy and Luke Smith are leaving Bungie on their own choice. They weren't laid off, but it sounds like they ended their contracts early. And these were, I'm going to be totally honest, not the most familiar with Destiny, but I believe these are two of the bigger figures in that franchise and at Bungie in general. And them leaving is a pretty big deal. Yeah, it seems like they're really banking on Marathon now, where I think a lot of people thought Marathon, this extraction shooter they have coming out, I believe next year is the target, was going to be like a holdover, a game they could get revenue from until Destiny 3. That was kind of the common thought. That does not seem to be the case anymore. It sounds like that is definitely not happening, actually. So, yeah, interesting times here. I'm curious to what happens. I do worry that this kind of seems like it might not be great for Bungie. This might be the beginning of the end for that studio, especially if Marathon isn't a big hit. The whole point of them going to Sony was supposed to be that they kind of remain autonomous from Sony. They aren't even a PlayStation studio. They're a Sony-owned studio, which there is a distinction there to a point. That doesn't seem to be likely anymore. Even if Bungie doesn't get shut down, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Sony tries to kind of make them their first-person shooter studio, because they don't really have that anywhere else. Their only studio that did that kind of stuff at one point with Killzone isn't making games anything like that anymore. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. This is a strange move. The most recent thing that came out about Bungie was that back in 2021, I believe, when they got acquired by Sony, Microsoft inquired and ended up not pursuing the deal because they found that Bungie was burning through money so quickly for the content they were making, which for Destiny, like, it's not that surprising. You have a live service game, and live service games require a ton of content made pretty often, at least in the standard of game dev. And it seems like they didn't pursue that. And I think it's hard not to acknowledge that there may be something weird at Bungie, very likely at the top leadership. Notably, after this was announced, the head of Bungie privated his social media accounts, and there were lots of anecdotes about how since they got acquired by Sony, he spent like millions of dollars on collector cars, and was even noted at one point during some previous layoffs when he was asked if the upper management teams were going to take pay cuts and things like that to try to alleviate some of these layoffs, said something akin to the idea of, well, we're not that kind of company. So I think when you see them bouncing around and, you know, going from Microsoft to being on their own, to going to Activision, to being on their own, to going to Sony, and maybe not existing or going back on their own, or whatever ends up happening there, at some point, you have to consider the least common denominator, or the most common, the common denominator is what I'm trying to say. And, maybe there's issues with the leadership of Bungie, and that sucks, because I have no doubt in my mind that the actual devs under Bungie, or who used to be at Bungie, are masters in their craft. And even though I couldn't care less about Destiny, and it's not my type of game, even though I like games like The Division, which is really the only game like that I enjoy. The art direction and the design and so much of Destiny is so iconic and so well respected by a lot of people, whether you're a fan of their game or not. And then you have their history back to the Halo games and stuff as well. So it sucks because it seems like the people doing the work are amazing at Bungie, and the people making the decisions might not be. And that seems to be coming to a head. Then we have Nintendo. We got their Q1 fiscal year 2025 report. So keep in mind, companies have different fiscal year starts and ends. That means that like Microsoft, its fiscal year, I assume, goes from July to June of every year. In this case, it was Q1. Theirs probably goes from April to May, or April to March, or something in there. For Nintendo, it reported a huge drop of sales and profit. It may be easy for especially the clickbaiters and the news people, and maybe if you've got like console warriors trying to make something out of this. There's nothing here. This is literally, they have new hardware coming out in less than a year, probably. And after selling like almost 150 million Switches, I think the number's around like 130 or so, but still, I believe it was maybe up around 140. Yeah, like I'm pretty sure they still sold more than Xbox, which is rough, like hardware wise. That's pretty tough for Xbox, but we've already talked about that, and there's also price differences and stuff there. But yeah, not interesting. It's just funny when the bad numbers for Nintendo would be good for pretty much everyone else. It's pretty wild. It's also worth remembering that when that new hardware does drop next year in 2025 for Nintendo, I suspect they will make up this ground and then some, unless they pull another Wii U situation, which if you ever look up the numbers of how many hardware units the Wii U sold, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but I do remember it being a number that was like jaw-dropping. It's so low. It's crazy how badly that sold when you look at the Wii and then afterwards the Switch. So, you hope that they aren't going to pull another Wii U, but they could. We'll see. I doubt they will. Moving on to non-gaming platform news, we have BioWare is going to reveal new gameplay. They're going to reveal an updated roadmap and the release date of Dragon Age: The Veilguard in August. This was talked about in a couple places, but specifically on their social media, and I believe they did a blog as well, which I still need to read. This seems expected. I made a whole video about the marketing of this game and how I think it's been fine. There's a lot of criticism getting thrown around about their marketing lately, with some good points. I'm definitely not denying any of that. I think that's all fair criticism. I suspect I'm like kind of the target of their marketing, and as someone, I'm not 100% connected. I'm not only paying attention to them every day. I think that they've shown enough to get my interest and my money, and I think that's the point. But for the people who are maybe needing to feel more convinced, especially fans of the previous games who are kind of leery about what this game is going to be, I think it's fair to criticize the way they've done it. I'm buying this game no matter what. So, like, maybe I am or am not the target audience. At the end of the day, I think that the game's going to come out and no one's going to care about their marketing campaign anymore. But how well the marketing campaign is received could determine how well it gets sold, which does matter a lot, especially to a studio like BioWare, who needs a win pretty bad. And as we've seen from all of this other stuff, just because a game makes money or is well received doesn't mean the studio's safe. So we have to keep that in mind as well. At the end of the day, I'm really excited for Dragon Age: The Veilguard because I'm excited to play it, and because they'll start working on Mass Effect. I'm hoping this is a big win for BioWare because I want them to continue. Speaking of Dragon Age: The Veilguard and things continuing or not, Game Informer, the still in print magazine and website that fell under GameStop, is shutting down and has shut down already after 33 years. This is pretty wild. I mean, I believe they're the only high profile game media outlet that was still making a print magazine. I haven't been to the magazine aisle of my local store in a long time, so I don't know if they're still if there's other companies still doing it or not. But they're the one I was always the most aware of. It is pretty wild that, at least if you're a Dragon Age fan, to know that they're kind of last big scoop and kind of big deal was to do a ton over the last month or two of Dragon Age the Veilguard coverage. It was also a big part of the criticisms of people feeling like most of the articles and interviews and all of that were kind of fluff, which I don't think is entirely wrong. It was a lot of kind of, we're so excited about this game, but no details about it. But that's just the way it goes sometimes. I have a personal touch with this because I worked at GameStop through college. So starting my sophomore year of college until I graduated college, and then I worked occasionally on call basically for a little while afterwards when they did midnight releases back when that was still a thing. I would pop back in and out. But I mean, I was a third key manager there at one point, which was kind of the lowest level management they have. And I really enjoyed my time at GameStop. I worked at some good stores with some really cool people in some nice areas. I know my experience was different than maybe some others. I've seen other people talk about their time at GameStop, and it doesn't sound like it was as good as mine. But it was an awesome job. At the time, especially as a college kid, it was perfect for kind of my interest and things I was into and doing. I think I bought and sold 8 different 360s at the time, and my last thing I did there, I think, was I actually bought a PS3, I think it was a PS3, a slim one, and that was the only time I haven't had an Xbox in quite a while. Selling those subscriptions was a nightmare because there was a lot of pressure from management, especially upper management, like regional and up, to sell those subs. How many subs we got every day was almost more important than how much revenue we made from games. In our little logbooks that we had to keep at the end of every day as in management, our store manager or the assistant was typically in charge of these numbers, but occasionally I was of collecting them and putting them all in, and I think we'd call them in and stuff. It was interesting. So from that point of view, the Game Informer was a nightmare. Because it was a big pressure part of the job. But as an actual magazine, that did employ a lot of people who were legitimate journalists. This sucks. And they've taken down the website, so all the articles are gone. There's nothing left, even though some people are trying to archive them. As much as I complain about gaming journalism and how it's mostly content creators with Word on their laptop, and I'm not going to say that wasn't the case with some people at Game Informer. I wouldn't say that was the case with the majority of folks there. And at this point, you just hope they land on their feet. It really does suck that at this point, basically you have to start your own new one or join one that's owned by IGN. That's kind of your choices now, it sounds like. Obviously, there's some independent outlets out there, but most of them are fairly new, started by people who got fired from other outlets that shut down. So the game media industry, as much as I criticize it and will continue to do so, because I think a majority of it will not be getting any better anytime soon, it still does need to exist, and I want it to get better, and it's not going to get better if it doesn't exist. So we can't rely on YouTubers and podcasters and hot take folks on various media sites to be the journalists, because they aren't going to do the cited research and investigation that a Jason Schreier does and others. And there's one Jason Schreier. There's him, and then a few other people attempting to do that, but not as well. And then just a bunch of people who are basically me, who get on the websites instead of a podcast no one listens to. So this sucks. I feel bad for everyone there, and I hope they all land on their feet. And then other wild news, but I think it almost brings things into perspective a little bit. Intel is laying off 15,000 people. I can't remember the most recent numbers, but I believe in the last year, the game industry has laid off around 30,000 people. That's awful, and that sucks for all those people, and we hope that all those people land on their feet, and we hope that, these greedy publishers and the people running and making these decisions, don't do this stuff in the future. There is a tiny part of me, though, that thinks that when people see, a couple dozen people get laid off from a studio, or a studio of 100 people get shut down, awful. Not trying to minimize that, but it does put into perspective when you see Intel lay off 15,000 people. This is like 100 studios worth of people, like a smaller studio. When you see Microsoft, not Xbox necessarily, but Microsoft as a company lay off like 20,000 people at once, like it's bad everywhere, and that doesn't make anything better for anybody. But sometimes when I see the reporting or people talking about the layoffs in the games industry, I think people get very narrow focused. They kind of put their blinders on a little bit and don't realize that at least in the tech industry as a whole, which gaming is part of, a lot of the issues there are actually kind of small potatoes in comparison. That doesn't make anyone feel any better who got laid off. It doesn't make anyone feel better who was a fan of a studio that gets shut down. But I think it should just bring some context to the situation, in that, unfortunately, whether it's still hangovers from COVID, where these companies overhired and overexpended, a big part of it is a lot of them borrowed really cheap money during low interest rate times to pay these people in the future, and that money's running out, and now interest rates are like 5 times higher than they were back then, so they can't borrow money again, so they have to lay all those people off. That's why you're seeing companies who are successful, companies who are making money, still laying off insane numbers of people, because they miscalculated, they gambled, and they lost. And the people who made those decisions aren't going to get punished at all. They're going to make millions and millions, if not billions of dollars. But the people who benefited from that gamble years ago are now getting punished and losing their livelihoods and everything that they have. So, yeah, that's where we're at. Moving on to some updates and personal news. I am beginning, and you'll notice in the background over the next month or two, things may get kind of sparse or pretty bad looking. Even the camera is going to be tough while I'm figuring out a new camera and all this stuff. I'm redoing this entire room. This is a third bedroom in our home. It was a bedroom. I still had a bed beside my desk here. If you watch the video version of this podcast or my videos, you've always noticed this big black blob that was over my left shoulder. That was a dresser that we've gotten rid of. I had a nephew who wanted a new bed set, and we gave it to them so that he could do that thing. So now this room's empty. It's just my office now. And I've got plans. If you want to see what I'm going to do, you can check out my social media. I've been posting kind of layouts of what I want to do, some designs and stuff. But it's going to be exciting, but it's going to take a while. It's going to be kind of expensive. So I use this as my homework office as well. So I'm not just doing this for gaming, even though it is a big part of it. I'm also doing it because I work from home quite a bit, and I want to improve that. So if you notice some chaos, if you see things starting to get kind of low brow or amateur, more so than normal, that's why. But I'm excited. I want to paint the room after 8 years here. This is one of the last rooms we haven't painted, so that's going to happen. And I've got some cool ideas for my office and gaming setup that should make it a little easier and a little better for me to maybe stream and stuff again here at some point. We'll see. That's always the dream. And then the last thing I have is for anyone who's been maybe doing their own thing with some health and fitness. At the beginning of June, I weighed 282 pounds. At the beginning of August, I am down to 258. So I don't know if you can, I've been intending at some point to go back and take all the podcasts and take clips eventually when it's more noticeable, the weight I'm losing. But we hope to continue it. I want to be down to 250 by the end of this month. I want to be down to 225 by the end of the year. And I'd like to hit 200 in 2025 at some point. So trying to do it slow and healthy. I do suggest that if anyone else is doing their own thing like this, quick losses tend to lead to quick gains. So I've learned that. And that's the wisdom I will impart on you as we depart this podcast and I begin to wrap it up. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and please consider supporting all of my content by watching, listening, sharing, and following all my socials, or throwing a few bucks my way. You can do all of those things via the link in the show description. If you have your own topics, questions, or feedback, be sure to let me know in my Discord and the YouTube comments, or hit me up on Twitter or Threads at Bondiesel or at the Echocast, the Baunfire. Had a little jump back in time there. That is all I have for this episode of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. So, until next time.